The vice presidential debate has come and gone, and most polling shows it made little to no difference at all for voters. There were still plenty of tense moments, though, like this one, for example.
That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by our own leadership.
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut.
To talk more about some of those key moments, we're joined now by Jesse Byrnes, senior editor at The Hill. So, Jesse, let's talk about some of these other key debate takeaways. First of all, who do you think won? And I know I just said that a lot of voters didn't really care about the debate last night, but do you think it could end up making any significant impact in the race?
Sure. Well, I think for political observers who follow the election very closely, J.D. Vance was clearly the more sophisticated person on that debate stage last night. He was able to turn every question into an attack on the Harris-Walz campaign and was able to talk about his own background, his own story, but also going on the attack on issues like immigration, inflation. And so I think for that reason alone, he was able to project a softer image. But for lay people watching, they really liked the commonality that they saw on that debate stage. They liked that both of them were very respectful. This was probably the most substantive debate from a policy perspective that we've seen since maybe 2016. And so I think for most viewers at home, they liked the positive tenor of this debate, even though J.D. Vance was much more the attack dog that we saw last night.
Yeah, it definitely took me by surprise how nice it felt at times. I think a lot of people were not expecting that as well. But one big topic of the night was abortion, and that was definitely a strong point for Governor Walz and his answer on that. But Senator Vance made an interesting comment about abortion. Take a listen to this.
As a Republican who proudly wants to protect innocent life in this country, who proudly wants to protect the vulnerable, is that my party, we've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us.
What do you make of him sort of calling his party out there?
Well, clearly this was a strategic move by the Trump-Vance campaign, having him go out there, try to project a softer image, especially on the issue of abortion. And we understand that Trump really struggles with female voters, that he struggles with this key demographic in several key battleground states. And so for J.D. Vance, it was really an interesting contrast that we've seen his rhetoric last night, acknowledging that the GOP has struggled on this issue. Compare that to what Trump has said in the past on abortion, saying there's no reason for women to be alarmed for a second Trump administration. So really a contrast and message there, but clearly a point of a strategic move by Vance last night to try to come across as softer on this issue, because we understand that he is trying to bump up the campaign's image among women.
Yeah, it's definitely proven to be a big challenge for the Trump campaign
Absolutely.
Over the past few months. One of the challenges for Walz last night was certainly his comment on the Tiananmen Square comments of the past. He seemed deeply unprepared for that moment. Why do you think he wasn't prepared to answer that?
For Democrats, that was the most disastrous aspect of the debate. Everyone knew going into this that there was scrutiny on Walz, his relationship to China, his past travels to China, and really his false statements when it comes to where he was in the summer of 1989. And so for him to come out in knowing that this was going to be a question that these moderators were going to press him on, and to essentially say, I'm a knucklehead, that doesn't really cut it. And so I think that the moment quickly moved on in the debate moment. Vance didn't really pounce. But at the same time, he's got to have a stronger answer to these questions moving forward, because the debate is really not going to be the end of these questions.
Yeah, well, it will be interesting to see if his answer changes at all from now
That's
until
right.
the election. The Harris campaign, though, has already released an ad featuring another moment of the campaign. Listen to this.
It's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power.
He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future.
That is a damning non-answer.
Why do you think it was that moment in particular? Do you think the Harris campaign is going to focus on January 6th a lot from now until the election? Do they think that was Vance's most vulnerable moment? What do you think?
Yeah, this was clearly the moment where Vance struggled the most. And he is in a very difficult position because For Vance, it's an audience of one on this question. He needs to tell Trump at home, I am your guy, I'm standing by you, something that even Mike Pence didn't do. And so when it came to January 6th. And so for Vance, he's in a difficult position. He really can't say anything other than what he said last night in terms of making sure that he keeps supporting Trump. At the same time, the Harris campaign knows that this might have legs. They are already turned it into a campaign ad. They're hitting Vance over this statement. And it'll be interesting to see how it resonates with voters. I think a couple of years ago, Democrats were very confident that January 6th and really playing up protecting democracy would be very helpful. And while that is shown in polling that might be helpful among some voters, especially older voters, it's unclear if that really rises to the top of the main list, which economy and inflation really being at the top of that list this year still.
Right. And I do want to ask you about Hurricane Helene now, because it feels like this is sort of becoming an election issue, right? We know President Biden is traveling to North Carolina. 1,000 troops are going to head to some of the disaster areas as Biden goes to North Carolina. Vice President Harris is going to Georgia. These also happen to be two very important battleground states, of course, on top of the terrible damage that has been done and all the suffering there. Do you think this could be another Superstorm Sandy moment? You know, President Obama was seen to have benefited from his response to that in 2012. That angered a lot of Republicans. Do you think we could see the same for Harris here, or alternatively, could it hurt her? Because we know the Trump campaign is saying she's nowhere to be found. Why isn't she there?
I think one of the key moments might have already happened, and that's Governor Brian Kemp from Georgia, when he essentially said that President Biden was communicative and helpful when the state reached out for support. Trump already tried to make that an attack on Biden that didn't really work. And so that might be the moment that people remember so far with this. We'll see with Harris going to Georgia. Georgia and North Carolina are really key for both campaigns. Essentially, if Harris is able to flip North Carolina or Georgia in terms of the electoral map, that makes Trump's path very difficult. He would have to win Pennsylvania and likely Michigan or Nevada or another state to actually pull out. And so there's a reason, even though everyone is focused on the disaster response, many people actually need the federal government to step in some of these towns and areas that have really lost power and been severely affected. It's impossible to ignore the electoral politics that are also at play.
Yeah, of course. Both things can be true at once. And, it's not just North Carolina and Georgia. All of the battleground states are just so tight right now. It feels like neck and neck everywhere. But there is some new polling from the Cook Political Report. It shows Kamala Harris ahead in 5 of the 7 total battleground states. You can see on screen there. Do you think there could be any issue or several issues that might end up swaying voters in any of these battleground states in favor of one candidate versus the other? I'm mainly thinking here of potential October surprises. I know it feels like we've already had 100 October surprises, but anything this month that you're keeping your eye on? Yeah, well, there are a couple things. Number one, energy is a main issue that J.D. Vance and Trump Republicans are really focused on. We saw in the debate last night where he brought up the issue of fracking and energy. That's really key for voters in Pennsylvania, which is really the ballgame. Whoever wins Pennsylvania has a very good chance of winning the election. Voting rights in Georgia. There's a long struggle over voting rights in Georgia, something that could really benefit Democrats depending on how they play it. And this disaster response is also just drawn really a focus to federal aid and just the interplay between state government and federal government. And so both sides, Trump has already been in office once. Harris is the incumbent technically this year. Right.
So both of them could lean into this as they have the experience, but as the world is watching, how do they respond in a presidential terms to a natural disaster?
Right. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because we know there's so much damage. So their responses could really make a significant impact here. Democrats also see an opening in the Texas Senate race between Ted Cruz and Colin Allred. Would be an admittedly tough battle for the Democrats, right? Because this is a reliably red state for the most part. Senator Ted Cruz has been in office for a long time. But Cook Political Report also updated Texas from lean Republican to likely Republican. Do you think there's a chance for him with just a few weeks left to make up those couple points he's behind Cruz? Yeah,
it feels to some extent like Groundhog Day with Texas and Democrats. They feel like every cycle they have a chance to pull out a victory, and every cycle they're not really that close.
Right.
And so, it doesn't stop the candidates from raising tens of millions of dollars. We've seen this in previous election cycles. Cruz is still very much the favorite to win next month. That being said, Democrats know that they are putting Republicans on defense in some of these states. So, there's an element of strategy to this where they're deploying resources in places like Texas or in Florida, places that are very likely to go to Republicans up and down the ballot. That being said, it does put into kind of the prospect of, well, maybe Republicans should be spending more in these states just to protect them. And so there is a little bit of that going on as well. I don't think many people expect Ted Cruz to lose this race, but nothing's out of question. And so I think going into this, the focus is really going to be on, we have the race for the White House. We also have the race for the Senate. Republicans are very much favored to win the Senate just based on the electoral map. But in places like Texas, if it's looking very close, that could be indicative of other areas that are much more competitive actually having a chance for Democrats.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how it all plays out. Jesse Byrnes, editor at The Hill, thank you so much.
Thanks, Bianca.
The IDF says 7 soldiers were killed in a series of battles with Hezbollah on Wednesday. They died during a gun battle in a southern Lebanon village, which also left 5 soldiers injured. This comes shortly after the Israeli military announced another soldier had died, bringing the total number of deaths to 8. Concerns are rising globally about the conflict turning into an all-out war. And now the latest on the 45,000 dock workers currently striking at ports across the East and Gulf coasts. The White House is now backing the demonstration, with the Biden administration ramping up pressure on U.S. port employers to raise their offer and step up to the table. The president commented on the strike earlier today. Take a listen.
We're getting pushback already. We're hearing from the folks regionally that they're having trouble getting the product they need because of the port strike. And the owners are making tens of millions of dollars in this. The last thing they need is to profit off of this. It's time for them to sit at the table and get this strike done.
The International Longshoremen's Association says the dock workers they represent deserve a significant pay raise, increased contributions to their retirement plan, and a say in the role of automation in their field. The union has halted shipments of goods across 36 ports, ranging from Maine to Texas, with some analysts saying the demonstration could cost the economy billions per day. The strike is the first time in decades this many dock workers have taken to the picket lines. It comes 34 days before a neck-and-neck presidential election, raising concerns it may affect how voters decide to cast their ballots in November. New York City Mayor Eric Adams returned to court Wednesday and could face additional charges, according to prosecutors. There could also be more defendants added to his case. During a court hearing, prosecutor Hagan Scotton said, quote, "We think that is quite likely." Adams is accused of accepting illegal foreign donations and has pleaded not guilty. The Washington Post has endorsed Democratic candidate Angela Alsobrooks in the Maryland Senate race. Alsobrooks sits at a 99% chance of winning the race against her opponent, former governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan. Current Decision Desk HQ The Hill projections show Alsobrooks up by 9 points. In 2018, the paper endorsed Hogan in his re-election bid for governor, a race he easily won in deep blue Maryland. The doctor of the late actor Matthew Perry is expected to plead guilty for his role in the Friends star's death. Dr. Mark Chavez has signed an agreement with prosecutors to plead guilty to 1 felony count of conspiracy to distribute ketamine. Chavez is expected to enter his plea at a U.S. District Court today and could face up to 10 years in prison. Perry died in October of last year at the age of 54 from a combination of ketamine overdose and drowning. 5 people in total have since been charged for their involvement in his death. A Virginia school board has agreed to pay more than $500,000 in damages and fees to a former teacher who was dismissed for refusing to use a transgender student's preferred pronouns. The Richmond Area West Point School Board settled the $575,000 lawsuit with Peter Vlaming, a former French teacher who says he was wrongfully terminated because of his religious beliefs. Separate from the agreement, the school board changed its former policy to conform to model transgender policies finalized by Virginia Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin. The policies now allow teachers at Virginia K-12 schools to refer to transgender students by their name and pronouns associated with their sex assigned at birth and not their gender identity. The policies have been heavily criticized by LGBTQ advocacy groups and led to a surge of student-led protests. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Bianca Facchinei. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.